Good morning, Jiuhuich, and welcome to Season 11 of Gather for Her, which is a powerhouse masterclass series for social impactors, exploring what it means to be a relational changemaker and leader in these unprecedented times of systemic change. I'm Tina O, and I'm your host. I'll tell you a little bit about Powerhouse. Powerhouse champions relational changemakers and their organizations, offering hands at your back support with our relational changemaker model to amplify and accelerate the social impact that we know you're here to make. So our theme this season, which is Season 11 on Gather, is holding space for vulnerability, which is actually part 2 of 4 that began where our annual Fire Circle left off. I'll explain that in a bit. In Season 10, our last season, our focus was breaking open to relational ways. And in Season 11, we're taking us further out onto the skinny branches to explore holding space for vulnerability. Every year we hold a Fire Circle, and it's a gathering, it's our global gathering of changemakers. And in that Fire Circle, we arrive at the next step of our exploration. And what arrived in that was breaking open to relational ways. The answer to our big question, which our question was how to heal our systems, was relationships. So this Season 11 is the second step that we're taking to explore that information that came from the Fire Circle. So every Gather conversation is offered to illuminate hope, to encourage possibility, and challenge each of us to make a shift from individuated leadership to interconnected, from top down to heart-centered, from transactional to relational. I'm Tina O, I'm your moderator, and I'm an ally of settler heritage, currently living as an uninvited guest on the traditional unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish people. I'm of Irish descent, and I am just beginning that journey to understand my ancestral story. I'm grateful to play, create, and do my best to steward the land where I rest my head on Nahuelaquam, which is also known as Bowen Island. And I'm super grateful to be in circle this morning with my co-conversationalists, aka the Braid of Powerhouse, Christina Benti, Charlene Sanjenko, Sharon Marshall, who's not with us today. And so Kelly Beatty is with us, who's one of our amazing Amplify coaches. And we're all going to introduce ourselves in just a second. We are your guest today as we're kicking off Season 11. So we're going to jump into this vulnerability conversation, and I'm going to pass to Christina to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christina Benti, and I am very grateful to live, work, and play on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and the Shuswap peoples and the Columbia River Métis, also known as Golden BC. And I am super excited about a conversation. Who would not be super excited about a conversation about vulnerability? But actually I am. So, and I am going to pass over to Kelly to introduce herself.
Good morning, and thank you. I am overjoyed to be in circle with all of you today and with those who are joining us here on Gather for Her and possibly on the path. And I'm coming to you today from Southeast Saskatchewan, where I am honored and grateful to call home, to have my office, and to raise my children who are now grown and kind of flown and kind of back. And so we're getting into a different rhythm and what that looks like. And situated on Treaty 4 territory, which is the traditional land of the Nahiawak, the Anishinaabe, the Lakota, Nakota, and home of the Métis Nation. And so thank you for once again having me in circle. And I think we're going to have our own vulnerabilities perhaps in this conversation, exploring and seeing where it takes us. Shar?
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure to be in circle with all of you this morning. I'm Charlene Sanjenko, and I'm the founder of Powerhouse and now Regen Media. I am an Indigenous woman who is reconnecting with my heritage after about 7 years, born in Splatsin of the Shuswap Nation, and reconnecting with what that means. what it means to be an Indigenous person living and leading in Canada and across Turtle Island in 2023. The teachings are important, and the teaching of holding space and being in circle and in regular conversation for the purposes of intentionally build relations is exactly why we're here. So excited for this conversation, and pleased to be joining you from the land of the Squamish people here on the Sunshine Coast. Back to you, T.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Well, let's just jump in. Holding space for vulnerability. I mean, I feel like Brené Brown did like all the work for us already, right? But so if we could like take her work another step, because we know there's everyone, I mean, honestly, everyone's read Brené Brown and loves Brené Brown, but where would we go with the work of vulnerability and this holding space from a relational place? What comes up for you? I mean, all the work that we do, as leaders with leaders, what have you seen? Why don't we start there? What have you seen?
I'm happy to kick it off. I was waiting for Christina. Happy to kick it off. When I think about the work around vulnerability and what we are needing to hear at this time, I'm going to say that we've been shaken at our core. I don't think we feel safe in our neighborhoods, in our countries, in our relationships. I don't think we feel safe with each other. I think trust is actually at an all-time low. And so we're scrambling to feel safe first with ourselves and then within our families. And how are we correcting and getting into right relationship with each other when we're also being consumed and distracted and swayed by what is happening around us. So we're a bit in the chaos of the storm, and I think vulnerability and a loss of a sense of trust of each other is at the core nucleus of that storm right now.
Yeah, and to add to that, in terms of my own work and my observations, is as a result of that, people are quite raw, and there's an openness to a newer way of approaching business and a newer way of exploring some of our systemic practices and our linear approach, and not just dismantling it, but actually looking at how do we expand it. So what I'm noticing in my work is that I can start a workshop off with a presencing exercise or a meditation or something that brings people into the room, and there is zero resistance. I'm just noticing that people are there are times when I'm uncomfortable, and I'll think sometimes to myself, oh, is this crowd up for this? But they're just, when I kind of lean into it myself, and I'm vulnerable enough to be willing to do that in a crowd of engineers or people who have very linear professions, I just noticed a willingness to enter in ways that I haven't seen before. And I'm noticing as well that people are willing to go way below the waterline sooner. There is not, I don't feel like I have a lot of surfacey conversations in my life and in my work anymore. There is an openness to taking a deep dive and pulling things apart. And emotional language is no longer vilified and again, in a very linear environment. So I'm seeing what I think is actually a really positive trust. So amidst the erosion of trust and amidst the anxiety and fear and the awareness that I don't know what's going to be happening. It seems like we're in this poly crisis. There's also there's a raw openness and a willingness to do something different, and we get to the richer conversations sooner rather than having to set the table for a really long time. It's like the table's set.
I love that analogy of the table is set. And I think that people are just spewing their truth a little bit more. I do agree. I think we are in a time of building trust. Um, and absolutely, there is a rawness, but I agree with you, Christine, and I see it as well in my work that people are diving into the conversations. They're willing to, I guess, speak their truth, um, be vulnerable in that, right? Because in order to be vulnerable, we have to, right, shed the table. We have to first sometimes come to the table. But people are coming and they want a different way. Um, and it's really exciting. It's really exciting to see a path that's not as linear, that opens up to something different, and people starting to see the change that it makes in our organizations and in the processes, the policies, all of it, and understanding it's the way that business has to shift to. It's exciting. It's exciting times to be in the space that we're in.
That's awesome, Kelly. It's also really scary times. I mean, I think it's exciting for us because we're devoted to this kind of work, right? Like we've said, this is why, this is how we hold change makers. This is what we do. Um, in my own work within Powerhouse and in my life, it's all the same work. I'm devoted to story. And what I notice with the people who are on the Amplify path in Powerhouse, or the authors that I'm working with on the Writer's Adventure, it's like you're saying, there's an excitement to share my story right now. There's a hunger almost to share my story. It's like with the permission of vulnerability. Thank you, Brené Brown, right? With the permission of vulnerability has come some empowerment. And also as a reaction to some of the atrocities that we've seen in the last 3 years, George Floyd, a number of them, there's also an empowerment around speaking up, so there's this cross section of my story deserves to be told, or this story deserves to be told. And so what I'm curious about, where we might go with this, because our conversation is holding space for vulnerability. And back to your piece, Shar, around, I don't think we feel safe with each other. I like, boom, yes, totally. Like, I think safety is a huge thing to explore around holding space. And I'm curious for you, Christina, like that willingness is so interesting to me, that either you've created safety really fast, or back to Kelly's piece, whether it's safe or not, I'm spewing. And now here we are as space holders, facilitators, if you will, like we got to hold that space. And some people might not be excited about that because, you could run away with the room. Where does that take you? Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in for a second, just because I think that so oftentimes, actually, when I go into a room, I make an assumption that this is how we're going to do business, right? And so that part of that is setting, as leaders, is setting an intention that I'm safe and you are safe with me, and inviting. So one of the things that I like to do is, we're probably going to have some tension. So like preempting some of the and there may be difficult emotions. And so pay attention to your own emotional landscape. Watch when you get triggered. It's okay. invite curiosity rather than certainty, and come from that place. Again, it's kind of setting the table. So as leaders, when we're doing this work, so that we're actually, if we assume, if we go into a room and assume people are guarded, they're going to be guarded. I'm going to go into a room and assume that you are going to be safe with me. And what's interesting is that that assumption allows me to carry that energy with me. Because that being said, I'm watching, when you watch on the periphery, definitely people's behavior out there, they are scared and there is a lack of trust. But as leaders, when we can hold the space in the room, under the assumption you are safe, that's an energetic message that is held and is experienced before the verbal is experienced. So don't walk into, one of my advice, I guess, is don't assume that that the room doesn't want to feel safe.
And I think it's important for us to set that stage, because I feel that there are those assumptions. There's always those assumptions. People go into certain areas, services, businesses, conversations, thinking because of the nature of what it is, they're safe. And perhaps they're not. Right. And I think it comes down often, we talk about transactional versus relational. And it brings us to spending the time to becoming relational with each other. And being able to dump, if you will, whatever that is that's on our mind, right? To share that thought, to share that conviction that we have about a topic, an event, yourself, to share that story. And I think along with seeing a craving for something different, a desire for change, a nonlinear approach, I'm also seeing in the work we're doing over and over and over back to story, right? Whether it be from building a relationship with those we lead and serve, whether it be with, how we're selling even. It's coming back a lot to story, which story needs some vulnerability, right? Story is not all rainbows, lollipops, and unicorns, right? There's some rainstorms in them too. And I think those rainstorms are really important for us to share to get to the good and to build relationships.
Shar, you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about where this takes me. Where we haven't been in this conversation, like where this wants to lead us forward into. I think for me, carrying on with what Christina said, it's definitely being more aware. Like, how do we continue to spread the awareness of entering every interaction and every conversation, from a place of hope, but also balancing that with absolutely recognizing the need for trauma informed communication, understanding the need that the person on the other end, you have no idea what could trigger them. How do we enter those conversations? Always, just being aware of, this is how I'm feeling, and also not yet understanding where the other person is meeting you, and not how do we take it from even that to just even more broadly understanding that we weren't raised to understand naturally that we're merely one patch in a patchwork quilt. We're just one piece of the puzzle. We're not raised that way. It doesn't come naturally to us. And so for me, it's where does vulnerability and holding space for healing meet up with I see you, I am you, we meet in the middle. That is what it means to be in relation. That is the whole point of this experience of life, when we haven't been born and raised into that culture at this time in history. That's where it kind of takes me.
Yeah, as you're talking, Shar, I can't, part of the job of change makers is ask better questions, and then pay attention to the content and the subcontext, right? And the context, right? And so it requires a level of presencing and awareness of your own self, and then what's going on in the ethos, and that is that should actually always be our growing edge as change makers. What are those patterns of those default patterns that need disruption and need exploration and need curiosity? I actually said to a bunch of leaders yesterday, I said, as you grow in your maturity, it's not that you're going to have all the answers. You're just going to have more sophisticated questions. And so develop your ability. It's really developing your curiosity about what is it like to be you and to have your experience without any preconceived notions. And, which is very difficult to do. But be willing then to go, wow, I just approached this conversation with some preconceived notions. And they just got dismantled. Yay.
I want to pick up on two things. One was the word change maker, and it just reminded me, oh yeah, like change makers are, we're our own whatever culture, whatever you want to call it. Like we have our own way of being in the world. You've heard this probably, other people say it, like we're building the plane while we're flying it. We're out on the skinny branches. Or some of us might be more bulldog like, we're out there willing to go and like grr the room to get through the thing. Like we live in that space of we're willing to disrupt. Like change makers are willing to disrupt, and knowing that Powerhouse attracts change makers, like holding space with a room full of disruptors is necessary, right? Because there are going to be triggers that go off. So I wanted to pick up on that, and then I wanted to pick up on the thing that you said that was like, it's hard to blah 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 blah, and my brain went, is it? And I know it is. Like I know it is. Back to Shar's piece of we aren't raised that way, but when the more in practice that we are in relational ways of being, it's not hard. It's just, it's back to, your work, Kelly, of seeing the human in the room, How would you, like, if this, you're going to laugh, but if this human in the room were my dog, right? How would I be with my dog? If this human in the room was my child, how would I be with my child? It's like it's that piece. I'm like, is it hard? Yeah, it's hard. And yet it's so not. But it's practice, right? And vulnerability. Oh man, do you know how many times in the day I cry? Like I probably cry like 8 times, but okay, I'm an artist and have access. I have lots of access, but I cry like 8 times a day. And I've, not for long periods of time, but I also laugh 50 times a day or get angry 30 times a day. And like, wow, that's who we're in front of every day. People like, so holding space for all of that. So who wants to pick up on anything? The disruptor thing? I don't know. Where do you want to go? What's next?
There is so much to pick up on. I think, going back to listening to Christina, it's also about that non-judgment, right? It's about not going in with preconceived, but it's in that listening, in that relational, in that story. And when someone's telling you that story, we are just it's a wiring. It's, like Shar says, it's how we're raised, it's our culture. We're hearing that story, and there's oftentimes it's like bing, 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 judgment, 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 interjection. And it's being able to filter, to first have self-regulation, right? In order to go, whoa, right now it's not for me. And I am going to hold space. I am going to listen to your story. And sometimes at the end of it, it's not, we tend to want to find answers, right? We tend to want to fix. And sometimes the most powerful thing I have found at the end of those is just asking the question, what do you need? Sometimes they don't need anything at all. Or sometimes it sparks them to go, wait a minute, what do I need? And in that, it creates that reciprocal. I know when it's been done for myself, I feel seen. And isn't that just one of the most powerful things someone can do for another, is to allow them to feel seen? And that is hard work, right? On the other end. And I think lots of times it's the greatest work um, in holding space. But as leaders and as individuals and change makers doing that work, we have to honor and recognize that too. Because energetically, it can be very difficult, powerful, but difficult. And we can't hold on to that all the time either.
Yeah, and when just to take it a little further out onto the skinny bread, I and to add what Kelly said about the importance of allowing people to be seen and to be themselves and to feel safe, and then to be willing to ask the question, like, what is it going to take so that we're not going to be having the same conversation a year from now? Because that's change making, and that is a risky question, right? And because because part of change making is holding space for what's present, and then being willing to collectively explore what is possible, what wants to happen, what can emerge from what has been and what needs to be composted, right? And what needs to grow from what is composted. And that is like, I can feel that in my body, because I've asked that question before, and I don't like asking it, because I sometimes like to stay in the messiness and hold space for the messiness. And I know that in order to really disrupt it, what wants to happen to ensure that we're not following the same patterns moving forward. And that needs to be explored in every one of our systems right now, because we can't stay in this story fondling, right? What's the new story that we want to live into?
And that puts people into vulnerable spaces, right? Because we're okay maybe with the story, But now we're asking you to move forward and change. And what is that going to take? And change is scary, but necessary. You're right.
And the question can't be asked too soon or too late.
Yeah, right?
And that's why I'm saying it's skinny branch work. You ask it too soon, you have bypassed vulnerability, and you have dismissed a process that is necessary for healing. Ask it too late, and yeah, we're all down the tubes.
Yeah.
Because if you ask it too late, you'll be back in the cycle, because that's what happens, right? We just go back around the traffic circle. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead,
No,
Kelly.
that's okay. It goes back to what Shar talked about earlier about trust, right? So even in that space, however it looks, we have to build trust to be able to ask the question at the right time. But then we're asking the individuals in that room, whatever that is, to trust us enough to allow themselves again to be emotionally exposed, to tell us, to share with us the story of what needs to change so we're not here in the same story in a year.
Okay, Shar, come on. I know it's there. What do you want to
Well,
say?
no, I'm glad we got here. That's what I want to say. I'm glad we got here because I do not want to be having this conversation
Yeah.
a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. Um, my Indigenous teacher says, we are at the end of a very dark chapter. So how do we allow the healing that needs to happen, but also recognize that we are at the end of a very dark chapter? Should we choose to move forward from that chapter? That's up to us. And I absolutely agree with Christina. It's how it's all about timing. I see you, I hear you. Um, I absolutely respect you. I'm trying to also understand you, even if I come from a very different situation or background. But more than all, I see the absolutely perfect human being that you were born you were born as and to be. And I know for myself what I do in situations where I find myself getting triggered or frustrated. First of all, I understand my own fallback emotion, because knowing what that is super important, right? Like, oh, I'm there, I'm frustrated. Okay, be aware, Shar, you're in frustration right now. Everyone has a fallback emotion. That's mine. But then what do I do about it? And I've been taught in my life to see individuals in two ways. One, in their absolute perfection and their ultimate potential and their greatest gifts. But two, wow, like as children. I look at adults and I only see children. And I think to myself, wow, I'm so curious how you were when you were a child. And you're a big child now doing big adult things, but really you're still a child that needs the same love and support and care and attention and energy. And I think we forget that. We forget what we really need to feel absolutely nurtured and nourished. And so for me, when I'm frustrated, I start to see people as the children they are and what they might need from that point. And that's one of my practices in terms of like moving this forward. Because I don't want to be don't want to be having this conversation even a year from now, or I want to be having a different aspect of it. That's for sure.
I love that. And what comes up for me around that is, one, I just love that you named that, when you're triggered. Like you have you go, oh, frustration is a sign. That's when I'm triggered, right? For me, it would be freeze. I gotta go into super reasonable. I go into like, I've got it all handled, right? So I think that's a great learning for anyone listening. And then I want to pick up on Kelly's piece of, what do you need? Many of you know I'm part of a consciousness group, and we've been meeting every second Monday for the last 5 years. And I can remember the first time somebody said, "What do you need?" And the vulnerability of not actually knowing how to name it, because I went right into freeze. It was right, just asking, "What do you need?" was too vulnerable, because my needs had been unmet for so long in whatever la 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 la. I couldn't even access it. So to create space, just want to open that, or allow that in the space. Someone may not be able to name their need because they have unmet needs for so long, and to hold the vulnerability, and then that's it. That's actually all. That's it. That's all I want to throw in the space. Yeah, go, Christina.
Well, and kind of to tie what Shar and Kelly said, is actually recognizing, actually, that child also needs a parent. And are you parenting the child in yourself and asking the child in you, what do you need? Again, that is, we lead from the inside out. And so that child in us needs an adult, right? Like if you look at some of the research around trauma now, talking about the presence of an adult that can hold space for a child experiencing trauma, it will impact whether that child continues to experience the effect of trauma, or whether they need that regulation, that an adult bringing that calm, non-anxious regulation. And so we need to do that for ourselves, and to do that for people that we work with as well. And so again, because it's inside out, you're doing all of it. And I agree with you, Tina. It was like, you're right. I said, oh, it's hard, but it is practice, and it's growing into it so that it is the water that you swim in. And so it's deep abiding attention. And I recently I heard somebody say, life is what you pay attention to. I'm like, of course it is. So, what are you paying attention to, and what aren't you paying attention to?
We're just moving into our last 7 minutes of this. And this is a condensed version of our Gather for Her. So I just wanted to give us each an opportunity to check in with what we're leaving with from this, so that we can check out. And I'm just going to drop this other piece in here. In the Indigenous teachings that we're surrounded by in Powerhouse, there's a lot of learning right now around the power of visiting, the power of just being with people, and that half of the heavy lifting of work, of relational work, happens simply over a cup of whatever, water, tea, coffee, just this. And I think if we could all just practice the humanity of visiting with someone, so much of our leadership stuff just gets handled, because we learn how to be with tears and frustration and without fixing. Just, for heaven's sake, would you just have a piece of shortbread with me? So I think the thing that I'm leaving, well, I'll go first. What I'm leaving with today is, what am I leaving with today? What do I need? That's what I'm leaving with today, and the my own work around bringing that into my leadership. What do you need? Yeah, thank you. I'll pass to who's ready to go. Christina, you ready to go? Or yeah,
Sure.
go.
Yeah, I am so grateful that I get to do the work that I do and that I get to work with the change makers that I get to work with. I'm just so deeply grateful. And I loved what you said, Tina. What do you need? And I'm going to add to the question, what do you need so that we're not having the same conversation a year from now?
I think for me, I'm leaving with, nourish the child, just keeps coming in. And really taking it from that place of what are the basics um, that an individual needs. We've got the basics of nourishment, but love and belonging, and just taking that to consider forward for self, nourishing self as I continue to nourish others and hold space for others in the change making work and in the work that I do with teams and groups and getting them to come together differently. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love Nourish the Child. I'm leaving with, okay, one quick funny thing. There's actually a stand up comedian that does a whole skit about company coming. And, oh, you can't eat that. That's for the company. Don't sit there. That's for company. And how we actually don't say that anymore. But yet, when we were younger, that was a thing, right? We don't use these dishes, they're for company. And I was like, yeah, it's so true. So it relates back to what Tina was saying about visiting. I am leaving with just again playing in seeing the child in you, seeing the childness in you, and helping you to remember and reclaim that for yourself. So I'm always asking questions about, you know, tell me like what you were like when you were 12. Tell me what your dreams were. Tell me, because I think as we learned from one of our great change makers, it's not, what's wrong with you or what's wrong with us. It's what happened to you? What's this journey been like for you? And how might I understand a little bit more of that for you, with you, beside you? So yeah, thanks for the conversation.
Thanks, Sharon. I just want to name that change maker. I believe that was Carlene Donnelly from Cups. And we did some work with them in 2020. So that was great. Yeah. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today on Gather for Her, a Powerhouse Masterclass series unpacking what it means to be a relational leader in these unprecedented times of global change. This conversation has been recorded and it's also going to be shared on our YouTube channel. And again, as a podcast renamed as How for Her, which you can find on Spotify and all the other places that you listen. Gather for Her is created by Powerhouse, where we champion relational leaders using our relational changemaker model, which looks like a community of practice called the Leader Path, a storytelling platform called Amplify, and our constellation network that is the House. Everything we do is guided by Indigenous and ancestral wisdom, which more often than not is matriarchal and matrilineal in approach, and that's where the her comes from in our name. Many thanks to our impact media producer and sister company, Regen Media, because you remind us that we can take the power of media into our own hands when we support stories that heal, regenerate, uplift, and transform. And a big thanks to the hands that are back at Powerhouse and Regen's digital storytellers, Zoe Gray, Madeline Archibald, and Willow Smith. And so many thanks to my co-hosts and sisters in change, the Braid of Powerhouse, Charlene, Christina, Sharon, and today's Braid member, Kelly Beatty. And to all of you on the Leader Path, and all of you who are watching this after on LinkedIn, our listeners, our community, our change makers, leaders and social impactors, thank you for walking with us in co-creation of the world we're living into together. You are always welcome here on Gather with us on Gather for Her, and there's always a place for you at our Fire in Powerhouse. If you have If you haven't joined us on the Leader Path yet, just go to powerhouse.com and you can join our community of practice very easily there. We will see you again, and thank you for being here with us. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.